Likeability beats intelligence. Why smart people are being sidelined in today's job market. Introduction. The new tyranny of niceness. Welcome to Depth and Light, the channel for those who don't just consume but question. In this video, I'm talking about a subtle yet dangerous cultural shift that many of you may have experienced firsthand. We live in a society where intelligence is not rewarded but punished, where competence often counts for less than likability. How did we get here? How did it come to pass that people with depth, critical thinking skills, and sharp intellect are increasingly losing out in the job market, while superficiality, conformity, and compliance seem to guarantee career success? Is this the new form of modern selection? Survival of the friendliest? Let's take a philosophical journey to uncover the madness behind it. Part 1. The Culture of Team Fit, the Rise of the Bland. If you've been to a job interview in recent years, you've probably heard it. The sentence that comes across like a conversation stopper. It just has to be a good fit for the team. But what does that actually mean? A few decades ago, job applications were primarily about skills, hard skills, measurable achievements, education, experience. But today the criteria have shifted. Job ads now speak of social skills, team spirit, or cultural fit. It sounds harmless, even positive. But behind this seemingly friendly rhetoric lies a societal problem, one that Hannah Arendt hinted at in her theory of the banality of evil. Arendt showed how ordinary people, simply by conforming to a system, could become part of something deeply questionable. Of course, we are not talking about crimes against humanity today, but we are talking about crimes against the human spirit, against originality, non-conformity, individuality. The so-called team fit is nothing more than selection based on superficiality, on the ability to submit to a group norm. Those who speak differently, those who express thoughts that do not align with common sense, are weeded out as not a fit. The philosopher Immanuel Kant defined enlightenment as man's emergence from his self-imposed immaturity. Today, however, many companies demand a deliberate return to immaturity. As long as you're adaptable, friendly, easy to manage, you're welcome. A modern job interview resembles a casting show. Smile, agree, avoid asking critical questions. Authenticity? No thank you. Reflection? Better not. Intelligence? Only in homeopathic doses. The problem? This selection process is carried out by people who themselves are part of this mediocrity bubble. They recruit copies of themselves. The system reinforces its own mediocrity. It's like the principle of a half-full glass. A half-full glass cannot recognize an overflowing glass. It only sees spillage, chaos, disorder. People with above-average intelligence, creativity, or depth appear to such recruiters as difficult, complicated, or, put euphemistically, not a good fit. Evolution in reverse. Survival of the friendliest. Charles Darwin coined the phrase survival of the fittest. By this, he didn't mean the strongest or most brutal, but those best adapted to their environment. In modern working life, however, this principle has become grotesquely distorted. Today, it's not the most capable who survive, but the most adaptable, or more precisely, the most likable. But what does likability mean in the context of job applications and careers? In most cases, likability is nothing more than the projection of one's own values onto other people. The recruiter isn't looking for the best candidate, but for someone who resembles their own ideal self, friendly, uncritical, easygoing, and easy to integrate. Likability is the comfort factor within a collective. And here lies the tragedy. Likability does not correlate with competence. People with high cognitive ability, sharp observation skills, and critical thinking are often perceived as inconvenient, and that makes them outsiders in the game of likability. The French philosopher Michel Foucault spoke of power structures maintained through invisible mechanisms, and that is exactly what we are witnessing today. The power of mediocrity securing itself through hidden recruitment mechanisms. When an average HR department interviews a highly gifted individual, a subconscious cognitive dissonance arises in the interviewers. The candidate is subconsciously devalued because their difference feels unsettling. Intelligence is a silent provocation. Intellectual people are often perceived as social disruptors, even though they should be the backbone of a future-oriented society. Let's look at how this works in nature. In wolf packs, it's not the nicest, most socially compatible wolves who become alphas. Leadership is won by those who show a mix of strength, intelligence, and charisma. But in human structures, it's no longer the strongest or the best who prevail, but those who blend most smoothly into mediocrity. As sociologist Max Weber put it, bureaucracy favors the inconspicuous. Part 3. The Masquerade of Competence. Why image has become more important than substance. A dangerous paradox has taken hold in modern hiring processes. It no longer matters what a person can actually do, but how they appear to be. The superficial facade is increasingly replacing genuine substance. A flawless resume with linear career steps, sanitized buzzwords in cover letters, a positive demeanor in interviews, all these are valued more highly than true analytical skills or deep expertise. Social psychologist Erving Goffman described in his work The Presentation of Self in Everyday Life how people are performers on a social stage. In job interviews, this performance becomes the supreme rule. Authenticity is only seen as a virtue when it aligns with the desired performance. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, a sharp critic of social conventions, once mocked, "People will forgive anything more easily than a mind that outshines their own." The modern hiring world follows this rule. Those who think in complex ways, who ask critical questions, or who refuse to conform are systematically filtered out. The term cultural fit has become an ideology. Companies seek people who fit in seamlessly, regardless of whether they possess exceptional skills. This leads to what cultural critic Theodore W. Adorno called a withering of critical reason. A current example is the standardized assessment centers used by many corporations. Role plays, multiple choice tests, group discussions, all these methods test conformity and adaptability, but rarely assess innovation or original problem-solving ability. Applicants become products that must present themselves in the most appealing way, not individuals who can bring their unique perspectives to the table. The sad conclusion: mediocrity often triumphs in today's HR departments. Those who can sell themselves, who flash a smile, who ask harmless questions, what are the promotion prospects, and who obediently fit into pre-made expectations get the job. But those who think independently, who are true lateral thinkers in the original sense of the term, who display intelligence, risk being labeled not a fit. Part 4. The Consequences for Society. Why our systems may collapse in the long run. Looking at the bigger picture, it becomes clear. This development has consequences far beyond individual job applications. It affects the functioning of entire societies. Because where adaptability matters more than competence, flawed systems emerge, systems that become unstable over time. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche warned of the last man, a person who has settled into comfort, pursues no grand ambitions, and rejects anything that feels inconvenient. Our modern work culture is producing this very type of person en masse. People who fit in perfectly, who never make waves, and who, above all, avoid speaking uncomfortable truths. This social selection has far-reaching consequences. In companies, creative spirit is stifled. Instead of bold innovations, lukewarm compromise products are created. In public administration, bureaucracy triumphs over real problem-solving. The best talents leave or are never discovered. In politics, parties select not the brightest minds, but those least vulnerable to criticism. Mediocrity governs. In the media, conformity is rewarded, not critical questioning. Sociologist Max Weber once spoke of the bureaucratization of the mind, a system maintained by its functionaries but never challenged. This is exactly what we are witnessing today. The creative elite is marginalized, suppressed, or excluded. Worse still, this selection based on likability not only creates mediocrity, but also a self-affirming bubble. When companies and organizations surround themselves only with people like themselves, they lose the ability for self-correction. Mistakes repeat, incompetence goes unnoticed, and corruption spreads unchecked. The result? A society that believes it is meritocratic, but in reality drifts into a state of self-satisfied stagnation. A society that refuses to acknowledge its own intellectual decay. This leaves us facing a historic irony. Education has never been more accessible, knowledge has never been easier to obtain, yet a new intellectual poverty is emerging, driven by social selection based on conformity. Part 5. The Price of Conformity, Mental Illness and the Loss of Joy in Life. The societal consequences of enforced conformity reach deep into people's private lives. Those who are forced to deny their authenticity pay a steep price. This price is becoming increasingly visible in our Western societies of affluence. Rising mental health issues, loss of meaning, social isolation, and a profound sense of inner emptiness. Philosopher Hannah Arendt spoke of the banality of evil, which arises when people allow themselves to be reduced to mere cogs in the machine. What we observe today is not only banal evil, but also banal exhaustion. People who have to play a role every day eventually break under the cognitive dissonance between who they are and what is expected of them. Sociologist Erich Fromm analyzed this dynamic as early as the 1950s. In his book, To Have or to Be, he described the human being who no longer strives for personal growth, but only for consumption and external validation. Fromm's marketing character is the prototype of the modern labor market, always adaptable, always moldable, always ready to fulfill expectations, even when the inner self rebels. The consequences of this alienation are measurable. The World Health Organization has identified depression as the most widespread disease of the 21st century. Burnout rates are rising exponentially. Addiction problems, from alcohol to prescription medication to screen addiction, are symptoms of a society that has traded authenticity for functionality. Growing loneliness, even among people embedded in social structures, reveals deep emotional neglect. Philosophically, this can be described as an existential crisis. Søren Kierkegaard spoke of despair of the self, the loss of one's true calling. Jean-Paul Sartre called it mauvaise foi, bad faith, when people deceive themselves in order to conform to social norms. Yet this societal sickness is not the fault of individuals, it is a structural malfunction. Our systems force people into self-denial, into the permanent camouflage of their true identity, into the continual devaluation of their own depth. A system that excludes its brightest minds, breaks its most sensitive souls, and ridicules its freethinkers inevitably produces a generation of broken spirits. A generation that functions outwardly but is slowly withering inside. And worse still, this broken generation itself becomes the new gatekeepers. They recruit, evaluate, and select the next wave. And again, those who conform most easily are favored. A vicious cycle of conformity from which few can escape. Part 6. Philosophical Alternatives. How societies should actually identify their brightest minds. Philosophy offers many models and ideas on how societies could truly identify and nurture talent. Beyond superficialities, group pressure, and likability. The first great thinker to concern himself with the fair selection of talent was Plato. In his work, The Republic, he describes the ideal of a society in which people find their place according to their abilities, not based on their background or popularity. Plato's philosopher kings are not the most likable or adaptable, but those capable of reaching the truth, those who have understood the allegory of the cave and can see reality as it is. Plato would have turned away in disgust at modern hiring practices. He knew that the masses almost always follow the demagogue, the one who speaks best, not the one who thinks deepest. Aristotle expanded on this idea by distinguishing between three types of life: the life of pleasure, hedonism; the political life, seeking honor and fame; and the contemplative life, the pursuit of wisdom. The highest form of life, according to Aristotle, is the contemplative life, because it allows humans to reach their highest potential. A society that recruits solely based on likability promotes primarily the political life, conformity, networking, and image management. The contemplative individuals are left behind. Modern philosophers like Karl Popper warned in The Open Society and Its Enemies that every society becomes blind if it fails to engage in constant self-criticism. But how can self-criticism thrive in companies where the boss's word is always final, and individualists are treated like saboteurs? The Enlightenment philosophers, Voltaire, Kant, and Rousseau, placed their faith in reason, maturity, and independent judgment. Kant coined the famous motto, "Have the courage to use your own reason." And yet this very courage is systematically punished today. Those who ask questions are labeled as difficult. Those who offer criticism are considered disloyal. Those who think independently are deemed inefficient. We urgently need to return to a system that creates mechanisms to measure more than just likability. Objective intelligence tests, like those used by Mensa or other gifted organizations, could help prevent the intellectual elite from being overlooked. In-depth psychological diagnostics that focus not on superficial charm, but on genuine intellectual capacity, emotional depth, and integrity. Blind application processes, where things like photos, names, and voices are irrelevant, and actual problem-solving skills are what count. Expanded school systems, as you mentioned, not just 3 types of schools, but 5 or more, with fluid transitions but also strict thresholds for intelligence and creativity. If a society can no longer recognize its brightest minds, it is destined to degenerate, and this process is already visible in many areas. Philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche spoke of the last man, a person who chases nothing but comfort, conformity, and small pleasures, incapable of greatness or depth. Without a major course correction, we are heading toward a world full of last men. Part 7. Practical Utopias. How organizations could fundamentally change their culture. If we accept that today's working world recruits based on likability and superficial traits, then we need concrete countermodels. Philosophy should not only analyze, it should also outline solutions. What realistic or utopian models could prioritize competence, intellect, and character? The blind recruitment paradigm. In a radical approach, every application could be anonymized. No photo, no name, no voice in the first round. Pure work samples, pure case studies. Whoever solves a complex problem best moves on. This model already exists in pilot projects, for example in orchestras where musicians audition behind a curtain. The result? Dramatically more women in top positions, thinking ability tests instead of interviews. Instead of small talk about hobbies, applicants would face scientifically valid cognitive challenges. No multiple choice, but transfer thinking. How would you approach a completely new problem? This would test people for adaptability, abstract thinking, and creative problem solving, skills that get lost in standard application phrases. A true probation year. A one-year trial period, not just for the company, but for both sides. With monthly feedback from a neutral body outside of the corporate hierarchy. Anyone who engages in bullying, whether colleague or boss, is immediately flagged. High-potential candidates can prove themselves. Toxic structures become visible much faster. Reverse assessment centers. Candidates wouldn't just apply, they would also rate the company via an anonymized platform. They would assess leadership style, openness, handling of criticism, and career opportunities for non-conformists. A kind of kununu, employee review platform, but scientifically validated and mandatory for every company. Legal protection for cognitive diversity. Why do we have protections for religion, ethnicity, and gender, but not for cognitive styles and intellect? A new anti-discrimination law could prevent gifted individuals, free thinkers, and non-conforming personalities from being systematically filtered out. Targeted state support for intellectual talent. Instead of pouring millions into questionable retraining programs, governments could invest directly in gifted individuals through startup grants, mentoring, and coaching. With options, either self-employment or highly qualified employment, without having to endure meaningless application training courses. A revival of craftsmanship and professional pride. Even beyond high intelligence, we need a return to vocation and purpose. A good craftsman, saleswoman, or mechanic deserves respect and a good life, without artificial academic inflation. People should be allowed to excel where their talents lie, without being forced into jobs that don't suit them. The goal of all these ideas: a society that truly recognizes achievement and character. No acting, no fake smiles for the job interview, no 45-minute monologue sessions like the one you experienced, but instead, depth, honesty, competence, and dignity. Part 8. The Psychological Consequences of Alienation. Why smart people get sick in dumb systems. There is an often overlooked collateral damage in today's working world: the psychological erosion of intellectually gifted and creative individuals through systematic alienation. It's no coincidence that highly sensitive or highly intelligent people are statistically more likely to develop mental health issues. But what lies behind this phenomenon? The collision between the search for meaning and trivialization. Danish existential philosopher Søren Kierkegaard spoke of the sickness unto death, the inner emptiness that arises when one lives against their own nature. Gifted individuals often have a deep yearning for meaning, for a connection between thought and action. When this drive is smothered by repetitive, meaningless tasks or toxic small talk, mental deterioration begins. In this context, burnout is not a disease of overload, but of under-challenge and humiliation. The gaslighting mechanisms of mediocrity. In mediocre environments, gifted people often experience both subtle and overt invalidation. Their objections are labeled difficult, their solutions over-ambitious, their sense of humor arrogant. This gaslighting leads to self-doubt. Jean-Paul Sartre once warned, "Hell is other people." For intellectuals, it is often the constant confrontation with ignorance and the group dynamics of cultivated stupidity that makes them ill. From flow to standstill, the lack of cognitive resonance. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi described the state of flow, complete immersion in a challenging activity, as a source of genuine happiness. Gifted individuals rarely experience this in the modern workplace, where tasks are uninspiring, processes inefficient, and peer groups intellectually isolating. What remains is boredom and frustration, which often manifest as psychosomatic complaints, chronic self-diminishment, masking as a survival strategy. Many intellectually strong individuals learn to hide their abilities in order to fit in. They slow down, adapt their language, avoid brilliant contributions. What provides short-term social ease leads in the long run to depression, identity crises, and a sense of inner decay. Albert Camus called it a life in falsehood. Hayen, the chains of learned helplessness. Psychologist Martin Seligman coined the term learned helplessness, describing how people, after repeated experiences of devaluation and powerlessness, come to believe resistance is futile. Gifted individuals, after repeatedly failing within the average workplace, eventually give up, accept underqualified jobs, and start believing their intellectual potential was just an illusion. Also, cognitive isolation, loneliness at a high level. Social contact is essential for mental health, but when conversations revolve around trivialities and deeper questions are seen as disruptive, profound loneliness sets in. Gifted individuals end up living in a kind of inner exile, leading to social withdrawal, loss of trust, and existential emptiness. 9. A culture of distrust, the pathologization of reason. What Kant called the public use of reason often becomes a source of suspicion. Those who ask questions are viewed with mistrust. Those who point out mistakes are labeled troublemakers. Gifted individuals find themselves in a double bind. Their strengths are perceived as threats, their critical thinking as aggression. These 7 mechanisms show the alienation of intelligent people is no coincidence, but a structural consequence of a system that prioritizes conformity over excellence. The result? Many brilliant minds waste away, fall ill, or withdraw entirely from the workforce. Part 9. Likeability versus competence. How society decides who succeeds. In every human community, whether in the workplace, in social settings, or in cultural discourse, there exists an unspoken principle of selection, the preference for likability over competence. The reasons are deeply rooted in psychology and can be explained through philosophy, sociology, and psychology alike. The tyranny of mediocrity. Hannah Arendt's banality of evil. Hannah Arendt, in her work on Adolf Eichmann, analyzed the banality of evil. The danger of a system does not lie in monstrous individuals, but in the mass acceptance of mediocre people who are just doing their duty. Translated into the modern workplace, those who are pleasant, adaptable, and avoid conflict are systematically favored. The brilliant, critical voice is marginalized because it creates disruption. The likability paradox, why competence is unsettling. Competent individuals challenge the status quo. They break routines, optimize structures, and intellectually challenge their environment. Likeable people, on the other hand, mirror the needs of their environment, creating comfort and familiarity. Sociologist Eva Illouz describes this dynamic as emotional management. Likability creates bonds, competence creates distance. Charisma beats substance. the tragedy of the first second. Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow shows how our judgments are primarily shaped by first impressions. In job interviews, the first moment counts: the smile, the handshake, the tone of voice. Intellectual people, who may be more introverted, matter-of-fact, or analytical, are systematically disadvantaged because they lose in this shallow moment of first judgment. Conformity over truth. Plato's allegory of the cave as analogy. Plato describes people who spend their lives in a cave, mistaking shadows for reality. When someone shows them the real world, they mock and attack him. In modern workplaces, this corresponds to the phenomenon where people bringing new ideas or uncomfortable truths are seen as troublemakers. Conformists enjoy higher social acceptance, the illusion of equality, how mediocrity is sold as the norm. In Western democracies, equality of opportunity is often confused with equality of outcome. Alain de Botton describes this as status anxiety. Society preaches that anyone can make it if they just try hard enough. Therefore, when gifted individuals fail, it is seen as their personal fault. The myth of equality prevents society from admitting that intelligence is unequally distributed. The economy of closeness. Why team players are preferred. Companies, especially those with hierarchical structures, prioritize smooth cooperation. Those who provoke, criticize, or ignite debate are perceived as risks. Team player becomes a euphemism for uncritical conformity. Competent people who see deficiencies stand in opposition to the goal of, quote, social harmony. The Americanization of corporate culture, smile or die. Barbara Ehrenreich describes in her book Smile or Die the pressure to be positive in Western work culture. Negative emotions are seen as a flaw. Dissatisfaction is pathologized. Competence that identifies and names problems clashes with this positivity culture. Those who, quote, disturb the peace are removed. The result of these dynamics is a paradoxical world order. While companies claim to recruit based on merit, they often promote likable people, followers, and opportunists. Competence remains a success factor only where outcomes are absolutely measurable, such as in elite sports, research, or certain entrepreneurial sectors. But these are rare exceptions. Part 10. Paths out of the trap. Survival strategies for the gifted in a system of mediocrity. When a society systematically values likability over competence, when conformity becomes more important than excellence, gifted individuals are often left with one option. They must find their own ways to avoid being crushed. This section focuses on strategies, philosophies, and practical escape routes, derived from historical and contemporary analysis. The philosophy of self-assertion. Arthur Schopenhauer. Schopenhauer, himself a genius unrecognized by his society, recommended already in the 19th century to maintain distance from the masses. His advice: withdraw, be enough for yourself. For gifted individuals, this means realizing early that conformity leads not to happiness, but to self-denial. Personal growth begins with self-sufficiency. Reversing the rules, shine in the niche. Many gifted individuals fail in the mainstream because they run into a wall of conformity. The solution: operate within specific niches where excellence is valued. These may include specialized industries, exclusive communities, startups, or creative fields where original thinking is considered a resource. The niche protects from the current of the masses. The bypass route, the escape via self-employment. Countless biographies show that gifted individuals thrive better in independence. Corporations tend to force high performers into narrow molds. while self-employment allows for creative freedom, autonomy, and thematic independence. YouTube channels, consulting, writing, or founding companies are classic examples of successful escape routes. Mental defense mechanisms, Stoic resilience. Stoic philosophy, represented by Seneca, Epictetus, and Marcus Aurelius, offers mental immunity against disappointment. Their credo: it is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. For gifted individuals, this means it's not you who is flawed for clashing with a conformist world. It's the standards of the environment that are flawed. Using borderless spaces, globalization as an opportunity. In an age of global networking, the opportunities for gifted individuals often lie beyond their local region. Digital business models, remote work, international networks, or expatriation can open doors where the local job market fails. Global thinking isn't an option. It's often a survival strategy. Cultural self-responsibility, creating your own intellectual sanctuaries. Gifted individuals benefit from creating their own cultural safe spaces. Book clubs, philosophical discussion groups, interdisciplinary think tanks, or online platforms. Regular exchanges with like-minded people keep the mind sharp and self-esteem stable, even if mainstream society promotes other values. Self-marketing instead of self-denial, the art of visibility. In a world built on image and self-presentation, visibility is crucial. Gifted individuals must learn to package their knowledge in a way that has impact without betraying their authenticity. Storytelling, pointed communication, and smart self-marketing can build bridges between excellence and social acceptance. We live in a time where abilities and intelligence no longer count, where success is not determined by competence, but by a crooked smile or the tone of voice during an interview. In a society where hiring decisions are no longer about finding top performers, but about casting for likable personalities, where it's not the smart, the diligent, or the visionary who are chosen, but those who win people's hearts after 5 seconds of small talk. What we are witnessing is a silent tragedy, a slow decline whose full impact we cannot yet measure, but whose traces shape our present. Philosophers like Schopenhauer would likely call this an inversion of the natural order. Nietzsche would have diagnosed it as the triumph of slave morality over noble morality. Even modern psychologists like Daniel Kahneman would see how our system is riddled with cognitive biases, likability effect, halo effect, confirmation bias, all well-known phenomena, yet they steer our society. We have mutated into a world of mediocrity. We worship the average, celebrate the conformist, the smooth talker, the yes man. We demonize those who think differently, who ask deeper questions, who are inconvenient because they shatter illusions. We label them not a team player, not a good fit, too cerebral, they don't fit and are discarded. The recruitment process has become an absurd ritual. It's no longer about qualifications, but about the comfort of the hiring panel, about the amusement during small talk, the psychologically coded "we vibe" feeling. In the end, it's not the capable who win, but the most adaptable. Not the sharp-minded, but the entertainer. This is visible in every corner of the job market. In call centers, where the friendliest smile counts. In sales, where the greatest confidence is rewarded. In offices, where networking is valued more than depth of knowledge. Thinkers are eliminated because they question things, expose errors, and aren't easy colleagues. Even in public service, we see this trend. Assessment centers are dominated by group tasks where eloquence trumps substance. The person who takes the lead, regardless of the quality of their ideas, is seen as leadership material. Those who ask critical questions are labeled troublemakers. This system devours its best people. It produces leaders selected for popularity, not brilliance. It builds teams focused on harmony, not on capability. It creates corporate cultures that reward conformity and punish non-conformity. But we shouldn't be surprised. Humans are evolutionarily programmed to value likability over reason. In ancient times, it ensured survival. Today, it destroys our capacity for innovation, our educational standards, our future. Even Plato warned in his Republic about the rule of the masses. He knew The masses love the flatterer, not the wise. They follow the loud, not the intelligent. Democracy collapses when people lose their sense for excellence, and that's what we're experiencing today. A democracy of the ignorant, a meritocracy of appearances, reverse Darwinism, not survival of the fittest, but of the most pleasant. We see it everywhere, not just in the workplace. On TV, talent shows reward emotion over skill. On social media, the most entertaining influencers triumph, not the most insightful thinkers. In politics, it's those who communicate slickly who win, not those with profound knowledge. What we need is a radical realignment, a social contract that values excellence again, that restores meritocracy, a true one, not a fraudulent one, that doesn't confuse intelligence with arrogance, but recognizes it as a resource for everyone. That brings us back to a time when competence was respected. We need to detoxify our selection processes. Anonymous applications are a good start, but not enough. Competency-based testing must become standard to counteract the likability effect. Artificial intelligence can help eliminate biases, if programmed correctly. In education, reforms must identify and foster giftedness, not break it. Early support should no longer be a luxury, but the norm. Teachers must be trained to recognize talent, not enforce conformity. We need a new appreciation for intellectual excellence, a culture where performance counts, not conformity. Where thinking differently is a value, not an insult. Where being inconvenient is a sign of depth, not of disruption. And yes, we need more courage to differentiate. People are not the same, and that's a good thing. Our task is to nurture everyone according to their talents, not force them into uniform molds. If we don't, we will continue to decline. Our innovative capacity will dry up. Our competitiveness will crumble. We will become a country of followers, of conformists, of smooth talkers. It starts with us. We must dare to be different. Dare to think against the grain. Dare to remain inconvenient. Dare to value truth over comfort. We must be brave in a world that punishes courage, truthful in a world that rewards lies, intellectual in a world that celebrates superficiality. The future belongs not to those who sell themselves best, but to those who think most deeply. We must make this future possible again.
At the end of this long journey, more remains than just words. It leaves behind an echo that resonates within the walls of this society. An echo of voices that were never heard, of talents that withered away, of minds forced into silence because they didn't fit into the narrow corset of normalized mediocrity. We live in a world where mediocrity triumphs, where the loud overpower the profound, where the superficial rules over the substantial, where hiring managers are no longer seekers of talent, but gatekeepers of false harmony, where it's not about what you know, but whether you smile, whether you bend, whether you fit into their molds. But what if we no longer accept this? What if we lift the veil, destroy the illusions, and rise up for the unconventional, the inconvenient, the unique? What if we honor the unrecognized minds of our time, those who tried to shine, but were suffocated by the fog of mediocrity? Let's not forget, societies don't perish from intelligence, but from stupidity, not from courage, but from cowardice, not from individuality, but from its annihilation. Every generation needs its voices in the fog. People who declare, "Here I am. I won't please you, I will challenge you. May this video be one of those voices, a memorial against forgetting, a sword against hypocrisy, and a gentle light for all those who believe they are alone. You are not alone. You are not broken. The world has simply forgotten how to speak your language, and maybe, just maybe, we will start teaching it again.
Thank you for being here. I heard something. I have to leave quickly. See you.